Hey guys, and welcome to this tutorial Thursday. Today we're going to be talking about GitHub, why it's useful, how to do the basic things with it, and pretty much what it is, just in case you've never heard of it, or you've probably heard of it before. It's pretty popular, but you're not quite sure how to use it or what it's useful for. So GitHub is pretty much, simply put, a place where you can store code for projects and collaborate with other coders on projects. So GitHub has what's called repositories. So for example, if I go to my account over here, you can see here that I have around 38 repositories. And each one of these repositories is a project that I've done at one point in my life or another. So let's just pick a random one over here and sort of look at what it is. So, alright, this is my Code 5 private repository. So, Code 5 was a project I did back when I was in university, and the whole idea of it was I wanted to learn to build a website from scratch. So, and me and one of my other friends did it. So, what we did was we pretty much put our code on GitHub. And now, what GitHub does is it allows you to collaborate with other people. So, say for example, you and a friend are both working on a project. And you guys want to work on it at the same time. So one thing you guys could do is maybe you could both have a local copy of the project. So say for example, it's a Python file that adds two numbers together or something, right? You have a copy of that file and your friend has a copy of that file, and I mean, it's sort of weird to think about how you can both work on it, right? Do you both write code and then get together one day and like look through the code manually and then put it together? Like, how does that work? And GitHub is introduced as the solution to that. So what you can do is I can put that file on GitHub that we're both working on, and what we can do is I have a copy of it, my friend has a copy of it, and we can both edit it and then push both copies, my copy and his copy, to GitHub. And if there are, for example, conflicts, like we've changed the same line or whatever, GitHub has a specific process to sort of review those conflicts and get over it. That's called merge conflicts. So another thing is, say for example, if we work on a project, most of the time it's probably going to have a lot more than just, you know, a couple files. Like for example, you can see here there are a lot of different files when it comes to making this project that I did. So let's say for example, if I'm like, okay, I'll work on one side of the website and you work on another part of the website, we can work simultaneously, and each, you know, once we're you know, making progress, we can use on our local version, we can take our local version, push it to GitHub, and I'll explain what all these like code words mean later. We can put it on GitHub, that way we both have each other's most recent you know, version of the project. So it's heavily used in industries. You know, a lot of companies, every single company uses, it's called version control. So every company has their own form of version control when it comes to their code base, and a lot of the times, you know, it's GitHub, they have a specific enterprise version for it. Some of the times, for example, Google is a company that developed their own in-house version control software. So there's a lot of different ones, but GitHub is sort of the industry standard. It's the one that employers look for the most, not only because they can come on and see your portfolio if you have a GitHub account. So say for example, if I was a recruiter and I was trying to, you know, check my profile, I'd be able to, well, let me go on incognito here, because I have some private repositories which only I can see, but a recruiter, if she were or he were to go to my page, they would be able to see, okay, he has 15 repositories, so let's see some of the projects he's done. It looks like he's done, it looks like this one's a machine learning tutorial, terrarium, that seems interesting, I wonder what that is, you know, location, what is that, you know. You can put your projects here, and a lot of the times recruiters, instead of going through your resumes, if they like your resume, what they'll do is they'll actually find your GitHub and they will go through your GitHub and they'll see if you've contributed to any projects. So let me continue walking you through sort of the different parts of GitHub before we get into how to use it and stuff like that. So on GitHub, you can also see they have a nice little overview of everything it does. They also have a really good tutorial on how to use it, so if my tutorial doesn't quite cut it, feel free to go check that out. And a big bonus when it comes to recruiters is if you've contributed to what's called an open source project. So an open source project is pretty much a project that the code base is open to the public. It's open source. Anyone can contribute to it, anyone can see the code for it. And GitHub is sort of the place to go when you're trying to look for open source projects to contribute to. So you can click the Explore tab here and stuff like that, and you can just sort of browse different projects that have been done in different languages for different purposes. And what a lot of people do is, say for example, to get better at coding, a big thing you can do is contribute to one of these open source projects. So let's go ahead and just look around. So if any of you have actually heard of AngularJS, very popular framework, it's actually open source and started by people, and it's open source on GitHub. So, you know, if I wanted, this is a pretty big project, but if you're a contributor to Angular, you know, a recruiter would look at that and be like, wow, you've contributed to something that like coders wide and far have been using. That's amazing, right? So if I were to say, for example, as you can see here, it's pretty overwhelming. There's a ton of different files, and you know, even if you were to start just like getting into it and looking into things, it'd be pretty hard to learn where to start when it comes to you know, a giant project like this, right? But if I were trying to get started, what I would do is I would maybe usually a lot of big open source projects have contributing tutorials. So for example, want to help, want to file a bug, contribute some code or improve documentation, read up on our guidelines for contributed, and then check out their issues. So on GitHub, you can also post, so let's take a look at these tabs here. So you can see here, the first tab is called code, and it pretty much just gives you an entire directory of all the files that go with this project. You can see issues. So issues are pretty much where if, say for example, I'm using AngularJS and I'm using Angular and I'm like, oh my goodness, like something's not working. What I'll do as a developer trying to use this project is I'll come here and I'll post an issue. And the developers or contributors to this project can come here, they can see all the different bugs and stuff like that. And you know, you can come up, if you're a developer, if you're trying to contribute, you can look at some of these bugs and try to pick one up and solve it, which is very actually similar to how industry coding works as well. A lot of, for example, where I worked, we had a specific board where people can post bugs. And as a developer, you know, we would have stuff called like bug jams, where we would be able to go through all the code and sort of look at different bugs people are having. And, you know, you can take that bug on and be like, all right, I'm going to try and solve it, right? So let's take a look at, I don't know anything about this repository, but let's take a look at what something would look like. So it looks like this person was the one that reported the bug, and he's talking about what the behavior of the bug is and how it should actually behave. And it looks like people have categorized it. It looks like no one's really, I guess no one's taken the project on. But that's an idea of how the Issues tab works. So now let's talk about pull requests. So the way GitHub works is, if I start a repository and someone wants to contribute to it, there's a couple of different ways they can do so. Number one, I can add them on as a contributor to a project. So that works best if you have a small team of people that are working on a project. So say for example, when me and my buddy were working on Code 5, you know, I added him on as a contributor, and we could both, you know, add code to our code base anytime we wanted to. Now, for bigger projects, you don't want to let just anyone have access to your code base, but you also want to keep it relatively open and easy for people to get started. You don't want to have to, you know, manually add every single person that wants to contribute, especially when it comes to a big project like this. So pull requests, what those are sort of a middle ground for that. So what you can do is something called fork a repository. So if I come here and I see Angular, I can do what's called forking. So, oh, let me go on my, let me get out of incognito so I don't have to log in again. Okay, so what I can do here is called forking, and what that does is it makes a local repository on my GitHub account with the exact same files that I have access to edit. So you're pretty much like making a copy of the entire project and putting it in your account, where you can make changes to whatever you want, you can add on to it, etc., etc., etc. Now, forking is very useful, for example, if you have like a project or a framework or something and other people want to build stuff out of that framework, what they can do is they can fork it and, you know, build it in their own direction. Or say, for example, if you have a really simple game like Pac-Man and you have it on GitHub and it's open source, you know, a lot of people love to mod games like that. So what they can do is they can fork your repository. So they'll take your copy of Pac-Man and then add their own touches to it and create their own game around it. So we can see here, if I were to fork this repository, takes a couple of seconds. It'll probably take a bit longer because this is a pretty big repository. Let's click the refresh button here. Okay, cool. So I have my own copy of Angular now. So as you can see here, my username is A to the Y, sort of a play on my name, Anthony A to the Y. And the URL to it is A to the Y/Angular. So over here, what I can do now is I can start making changes to this repository because it's on my account now. And let's say, for example, I saw one of those bugs need fixing. So what I can do is I can make a copy of the code. I can get in there. I can start coding. I can fix that bug that people were experiencing, and then let's say, for example, I have the fix to that bug and I want to update, you know, let's say I had to change one file around. What I could do is I can create what's called a pull request. So what I can do is I can create a pull request, and what that does is I'm pretty much saying, hey, I changed some of your code and I want to make that change available to your repository, to the big repository that everyone's using, and not just my copy of the repository. So what you'll do is you can create a new pull request around that. And what'll happen is within that pull request, you know, someone who's a collaborator on the real project will go through it. They'll look at your code. They'll, you know, assess whether or not your change is proper or not. And if it is, they'll merge your code into the overall code base. Now let's go through the process of actually creating a repository and coding. So you're going to go to your profile. Oh, I was already on my profile. You're going to click repositories and you're going to click new. So over here you can decide whether or not you want to make it private, public. So let's make a public repository. Let's just call it test repo. And let's initialize a README. So we're going to create the repository. Now, when it comes to connecting a repository with an online repository with your local code, there are a couple of things you have to do. So number one, you actually have to find a way to use GitHub on your local machine. So I use a Mac and I love coding in terminal. So what I do is, let's say for example, I'm going to make a new repository called test repo. I'm going to get inside of test repo. And you can use git commands from here. So for example, if I type in git, I can see a little bit of a list of commands and stuff like that. If you're on Windows, you can use what's called git bash, which I'll have a link to in this PowerPoint. So I'm actually going to link this PowerPoint later, or I was going to talk to you guys about this PowerPoint later. But it has like, it shows you where you can install Git for Mac, or if you want to install Git Bash for Windows, or you can use a GUI. And the most popular one that people use is called source tree, I believe. Yes. So here's source tree. This is pretty much like if you want to see like you know, a visual of the directory of your code and like how everything's being committed and stuff like that. I personally prefer the command line just because I feel like you have more control. But you know, to each their own. From my experience, people in the industry also prefer command line. So once you have git installed, the first thing we're going to do is called git init, which is the most basic command. It initializes a repository on your local machine. So you can see here I've initialized this repository. Now, what I want to do is I want to add, I want to somehow communicate to my local GitHub and my repository online that this repository I just initialized is connected to this repository we made on our thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a command called git add origin. We're going to say, hey, look, this this repository that we have over here correlates to this repository that we have on our account, because you know you can have hundreds of different repositories. How's the code? How's your local machine supposed to know which repository your local code refers to? So we're gonna go. I believe the command is git remote add origin, and then the name of the the name of the GitHub. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to pull, we're going to do what's called a git pull. Now a git pull, essentially what it is you're saying, hey, if there's anything on this online repository that I don't have, if there's any files, any updated code that I don't have, I want you to pull that and push it onto my local machine. So let's go ahead and go back to our thing over here. So the first time you pull from a repository, if you've just created it just like we have, you have to do git pull origin master. Now, this is pretty much sort of just semantics. It's telling our code we want to which repository we're pulling from and which branch we're pulling from. And I haven't gone into branches, but you don't have to worry about that quite yet. So as we can see here, if I now look at the files, we have the README that was once in here. So let's do a couple of things. First, let's edit that README. So in here it has hashtag test repo, welcome to my test repo. Let's just add some text in here. All right, now I'm also going to create a new file. Let's call it, I don't know, hello.py, right? And in hello.py, I can just write something like, print hi. And I'm editing all these files through command line just for the sake of time through Vim. So what we have here is we've edited our original file that we pulled, and we have also created a new file. However, if you come back here and you refresh, you'll notice that the original file hasn't been updated and the second file isn't there. If we go to this original file, you can see that it's still just hashtag test repo. And this is a markdown language file, which means hashtag turns it into a title, which is why you don't see the hashtag here, and it just looks like big letters and stuff like that. So now, what we have to do in order to, the opposite of pulling is pushing. Pushing is say, hey, I have code on my local machine that I want to push onto the online repository. And in order to push, you have to do 3 different things. The first thing is you have to start tracking the new files or the changes to the old files that you've made. So here's a nifty little command. It's called git status. And if we type git status, it'll pretty much say what's happening in our repository. So the first thing that happens is we've modified, GitHub realizes we have modified the readme.md. And it also sees that we have an untracked file called hello.py. GitHub is not yet tracking this untracked file. It doesn't think it's part of the repository right now. So in order to change that, what you can do is you can type in git add and then the name of the file itself. So we want to add our changes that we made to README, to the README file, so we type git add it, so we're tracking the changes. Now if we type in git status, you can see it is now green, which means it is tracking it, but we're still not tracking hello.py. So we can also just type in git add hello.py, but a nice little trick, if you have a lot of files that you're trying to track, you could just type git add period, and it will add all the untracked files and all the untracked changes that you've made. So if we type in git status now, we can see everything is ready to be what's called committed. So that's pretty much the second step. It's called committing. So you can think of committing sort of like, if you think of this entire process of pushing as creating a gift, okay? Let's say a Christmas gift for somebody. Let's say you have a box and you want to put all your Christmas gifts to a specific person in that box. Adding is like taking that gift, an individual gift, let's say a pair of socks, and you add it into your box. Let's say you got him a pair of, a new shirt or a pair of shoes. You would take those items and you would add it into the box, right? And you can just keep adding stuff. Now, when you're ready to ship that off to the person and give it to them, you do what's called committing. Now, committing is like putting the lid on top of the box and wrapping it in wrapping paper, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to type git commit, and on top of that, we also write -m and then quotes, and we write a message. So you can think of a message as like the tag on the gift box. What the people that are going to be seeing this gift are going to see, right? So in GitHub terms, your commit message is pretty much what people see when they look at your commits, when they look at all the changes you've made to their code. So if you're working with a lot of people, you want to write really helpful commit messages so they know what you're changing around. Something like, I added, a new functionality that does this, or I fixed this bug or something like that. So we can just say edited the README and added the hello.py file. And end quotation, and now we've wrapped it. The last thing we have to do is just not Python, git push remote, or git push origin master, and it's now going to push our code. And as you can see here, we will come back here, refresh our page, And the README was updated, so a cool little feature at GitHub. It shows the README on the first page. And we have our second file, hello.py. That is the basics of how to use GitHub. So if we can go here, we can see a couple of cool things. So number one, we can see the different commits people have made. Let me actually go back to one of my more popular repositories so you can get an idea of how commit messages are useful and stuff like that. So let's go to Code5, bam. So my commit messages, I made this repository a couple of years ago, and my commit messages weren't the best. But you can see here, not sure. You can see here, for example, I fixed a bug. This commit, for example, I fixed a bug. PHP doesn't support, not equals null anymore on a query object, so blah, blah, blah. That's the had to use count. So this is a commit, this is a bug that I fixed. And you can see here on the left side, it shows, in red, it'll show, for example, I edited this line of code, and I specifically removed this piece of code and added this, right? So for example, if query is not equal to null, I said if count is greater than 0, and then I change it up. So that's an example of me like getting rid of a bug or something and committing it. And when you're in the industry, the way it works is when you make commits, you can make them in forms of what's called pull requests, which we went over a bit. It's sort of like forking. And someone, let's say I make a change. If you have like a really swimming database or a really swimming repository that 20 people are contributing to, you don't want every single commit that you make to just go straight to the code base. You want people to review it first just so you don't break anything, right? A lot of the times, a lot of your code bases are going to be in production. Like people are going to be using this code. If you make a mistake and you don't realize it and you push it to the code base and you break everything, like that's pretty detrimental, especially in a business environment. So what you'll do is you'll make a separate branch to work on. So branching is sort of like forking, except within the local repository. So let's say I want to add a new feature or make a bug fix. I can copy the repository or make my own copy of the repository called a branch within that repository, work on that specific branch, and then when the fix is ready, what I can do is I can create a pull request, and that pull request pretty much says I'm ready for this to go back into the code. So if we can look here, let's see if we can look into insights. Okay, I wasn't doing that for this repository, but if we go to a more popular repository, like say for example Angular, and we look at the different branches, actually let's go to insights so we can sort of see a cool breakdown of the branches. Let's see, should be somewhere here, forks maybe, no, this is not it. Dependency, no. Ooh, maybe commits or something, pull requests, should be somewhere here. So as you can see, like even just straight up, GitHub has a lot of different features for if you are working with a large team and stuff like that. You can see like how many people have committing. You can look at contributors to see who's committed what. So if you're a major contributor on a project, it's really easy for employees to find you. If I was looking for an Angular developer and I wanted someone really good, I'd probably like look through here and see people that have contributed. I'd be like, oh, like this person has contributed quite a bit. This is pretty cool. Let me check his profile out and stuff like that. So here are different pull requests. The thing I'm looking for is there's a really nice graphic where you can see how branches sort of merge back into each other and stuff like that. But I'm not sure where to find it at the moment. Anyways, that's pretty much how it works. And those are the basics. Don't fear if you don't fully understand how everything works just quite yet. I just want to give you a very general overview of what GitHub is used for, what are some of the terms, what are some of the use cases, and even I didn't really understand a lot of the different, examples or concepts when using GitHub until like I actually worked with a big team and I worked in my company. So if you're just getting started, I would highly recommend just start using GitHub for small projects. Do what I did, like start a small little project, start to edit it and put your code on GitHub, make a nice README and stuff like that, and put your GitHub on your resume, because I can't express enough how much recruiters like that type of stuff. Having your GitHub on your resume and having it easily accessible for recruiters to go and check it out is a huge plus. So I highly recommend it. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Also, I'm going to be attaching to this video a little tutorial that I made a little while back. It's way more regimented. This is sort of more of an off the top, no cuts, no edits type of video to show you how it works. But this has like a specific, if you're looking for a very specific short tutorial to go through on how to use GitHub and why it's useful, just go through this tutorial. And I'm going to link it in the description below. So yeah, you can see a lot of cool things with it, and it goes pretty in depth on how to use things. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and like I said, I'm going to be making a lot of changes to the Forge, so stay tuned, and thank you guys so much for watching and giving me the feedback to keep doing these videos. And take care and have a great Thursday.